If you want to feel entirely useless, just turn on the news for about 5 minutes.
Right.
I mean, we're just constantly surrounded by these global conflicts, systemic failures, and, societal fractures that feel way too massive for any single person to actually fix.
Yes, totally. It's overwhelming.
Right. You look at a screen showing all this geopolitical chaos or widespread polarization, and the human brain essentially just short circuits. We are left feeling completely paralyzed, caught between this desire to do something and the crushing realization that we have absolutely no leverage on a macro scale.
Well, that paralysis is basically the defining psychological state of the modern information age. I mean, we have this unprecedented visibility into the world's trauma, but our biological capacity to process it or, intervene in that trauma, it really hasn't evolved past the tribal village level.
Which is pretty small, relatively speaking.
Exactly. We are effectively trying to drink from a fire hose of global suffering using the emotional plumbing of a hunter-gatherer. And naturally, it generates this profound sense of helplessness.
And that feeling of helplessness is exactly why we are opening the book on a very specific document for today's deep dive. We are looking at a text called The Peaceful World Blueprint, version 1.0.
Oh, it's a fascinating document.
It really is. It serves as the foundational manifesto for the peaceful world movement. But we are not going to dissect the entire document today. The blueprint itself is massive. It covers these huge structural concepts.
Right, the macro level stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So we're ignoring almost all of it. Instead, our mission today is to put a microscope over just 2 sentences hidden at the very end of the text. It's the section titled The Final Commitment.
And honestly, focusing exclusively on that concluding commitment is, well, it's the only way to truly understand a manifesto. I mean, throughout history, whether you were looking at political declarations or philosophical treatises, the body of the text is almost always dedicated to abstract ideals.
Like the grand vision?
Right, the grand vision. It's where the authors build their worldview, outline the problems, and propose these grand sweeping systems. But the final paragraph, the commitment itself, that is the crucible.
Oh, I like that word, crucible.
Yeah, because that is where all the theoretical architecture gets stripped away, The abstraction is forced to become a binding, actionable contract for the individual reading it.
It's the demand. The entire document makes an argument, and the final commitment basically looks at the reader and says, so what are you going to do about it?
Exactly. It forces your hand.
And as we tear into these specific 2 sentences today, we are going to see an entire operational philosophy for a peaceful life, just compressed into this tiny space. It's a complete paradigm shift regarding how we view personal responsibility in a chaotic world.
It really reframes everything.
It does. And the very first clause of this commitment, it sets a tone that I found completely counterintuitive for a movement focused on peace. It begins with a disclaimer. It says, quote, "We are not a union of saints, but a community of people who have realized their responsibility."
I love that opening. Starting a foundational pledge by explicitly rejecting the concept of saintliness, it's just a brilliant preemptive strike against the single most common cause of institutional collapse.
Which is what, exactly?
The purity spiral. When we look at the sociology of social movements, I mean, from the French Revolution all the way to modern digital activism, they almost always default to demanding absolute moral purity from their members.
Oh, right. Like cancel culture within the movement itself?
Exactly. You have to possess the perfect vocabulary, an unblemished historical record, and this unwavering superhuman moral compass just to be allowed into the ranks.
And the moment you demand perfection like that, you set a trap for yourself. Because human beings are fundamentally flawed. I mean, if a movement's credibility relies on its members being flawless, the entire structure is built on a lie.
It's a house of cards. Eventually, a leader will make a mistake or a member will lose their temper. And because the baseline was set at perfection, that totally normal human error becomes a catastrophic failure of the movement's ideology.
Let's look at the underlying psychology of that dynamic, though. Demanding saintliness creates an incredibly exclusive, elite in-group, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It becomes a competition of moral posturing rather than a collaborative effort toward an actual goal. People within the movement end up spending more energy policing each other for minor infractions than they do addressing the external problems they were formed to fight in the first place.
Right, the classic circular firing squad.
Yeah. So by starting this manifesto with, "We are not a union of saints," they immediately disarm those purity testers. They are telling their own members and, well, the world at large, that moral perfection is not the barrier to entry.
It effectively removes the imposter syndrome that keeps ordinary people from getting involved. Because If I think I have to be a modern-day Gandhi to advocate for peace, I'm never going to start. I know my own flaws.
Right, we all do.
I mean, I know I get frustrated in traffic. I know I can be short-tempered when I'm tired. If saintliness is the prerequisite, I disqualify myself before I even read the second sentence.
Which is why this opening is so vital. It shifts the entire burden of participation. The burden is no longer about maintaining this spotless, untouchable character. The burden is relocated to a much more functional space, which is awareness.
A community of people who realize their responsibility.
Exactly. Realizing your responsibility is not a static state of moral grace. It's an active, ongoing cognitive process. It is a state of being awake to your impact on your environment.
Let me push back on this a little bit, though. A movement aiming to end violence and build a peaceful world is making a very bold claim. Doesn't it need relatively spotless leaders to maintain any sort of public credibility?
That's a common assertion, yeah.
I mean, if you admit right out of the gate that you are flawed, prone to anger, and essentially just as messy as everyone else, how do you defend against charges of hypocrisy? Like, if someone wearing a Peaceful World badge is seen screaming at a customer service representative, doesn't that invalidate the entire philosophy for anyone watching?
Well, only if the philosophy claimed that screaming at customer service reps was impossible for its members. Hypocrisy requires a gap between your stated identity and your actual behavior.
All right, that makes sense.
Right. The saint who screams at a cashier is a hypocrite because they claim to be above human frustration. But the person who has simply realized their responsibility, they aren't a hypocrite when they fail. They are a practitioner who has just dropped their tool.
Oh, I see.
And more importantly, because their identity is rooted in responsibility rather than perfection, the failure itself becomes a moment to practice the philosophy.
So the failure actually becomes the arena for the work.
Yeah.
Instead of hiding the outburst to protect this illusion of purity, the individual is obligated by their own commitment to take responsibility. They have to apologize.
Exactly.
They have to de-escalate the mess they just made. The recovery process becomes the actual demonstration of the movement's values.
Yeah, and we see this exact dynamic in high-reliability organizations like aviation or nuclear power.
Oh, interesting comparison.
Yeah, they do not operate on the assumption that human operators are perfect. They operate on the assumption that human error is inevitable. Therefore, their entire safety culture is built around recognizing errors quickly and taking immediate responsibility to correct them.
Wow, so this manifesto is applying that same high-reliability framework, but to human morality. It abandons the brittle defense of perfection and adopts the resilient defense of accountability.
Exactly.
It's the difference between claiming you are a master chef who has never once burned a dish versus stating you are a dedicated student of the kitchen who knows exactly how to put out a grease fire and scrub the pans when things go wrong. One is a fragile ego, and the other is a robust skill set.
And framing it as a robust skill set leads directly into the specific identity the pledge assigns to the reader. Once we strip away the expectation of being these passive, perfect saints floating above the fray, the text grounds us in a very specific utilitarian role.
Right. So the text continues, quote, "By signing this manifesto, I commit to being an agent of change, sharing the tools of peace," unquote. Let's pause and dissect those two phrases because they completely reframe how we usually talk about this subject, agent of change and tools of peace.
Let's start with agent.
Yeah, the word agent carries a lot of semantic weight here, doesn't it?
It really does. In sociology, the concept of agency is central to how we understand human behavior. An agent is an individual who possesses the capacity to act independently and make their own free choices.
As opposed to what?
Well, it stands in direct opposition to structure or determinism. That's the idea that our actions are entirely dictated by our environment, our history, or systemic forces.
Oh, I see. So by demanding you become an agent, the text is essentially demanding you reject victimhood and passive observation.
Exactly. An agent is a catalyst within a system, not just a byproduct of it.
It kind of conjures the image of an intelligence operative or a field agent. You aren't just sitting in a cafe observing the geopolitical weather, You are deployed. You have a specific operational directive.
And the directive itself is what really catches my attention here.
Yeah, sharing the tools of peace. Historically, peace is almost always framed as a feeling, right?
Yeah.
A passive state of rest or an abstract ideal. We talk about finding peace like it's a hidden treasure somewhere, or feeling at peace like it's a neurological state of zen.
Or we define it purely in the negative as just the simple absence of war or loud conflict.
Right, exactly.
There's this sociologist, Johann Galtung. He was the principal founder of the discipline of peace and conflict studies. He differentiated between negative peace and positive peace.
Okay, break that down for me.
So negative peace is just the absence of direct violence. If two neighboring countries hate each other, have their missiles pointed at each other but haven't pulled the trigger today, that is negative peace. It's an illusion of stability based entirely on tension.
And positive peace.
Positive peace, on the other hand, is the presence of attitudes, institutions, and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies. It is an active, engineered environment.
And the phrase tools of peace places this commitment firmly in the realm of positive peace, doesn't it? It treats peace not as a hopeful emotion, but as a technology. It is a highly practical skill set.
Yeah, it completely shifts the paradigm.
I mean, if I tell you to share a feeling of peace with someone, you might just smile at them or offer a platitude. But if I tell you to share a tool of peace, that requires a physical or conceptual transfer of utility.
A tool has a specific mechanical function. A hammer drives a nail. A wrench turns a bolt. So if peace is a tool set, we have to ask what the conceptual mechanics are. What drives the nail of connection? What turns the bolt of de-escalation?
So we are talking about literal learnable techniques here, like active listening is a tool. The ability to identify and regulate your own nervous system before responding to a perceived threat, that's a tool. Understanding how to structure an apology so it doesn't sound defensive is a tool. Knowing how to mediate a dispute between two hostile parties without becoming triangulated into the conflict, that is a highly specialized tool.
And just like physical tools on a construction site, these conceptual tools require training.
Right. You can't just pick them up and instantly be an expert.
No, definitely not. If you hand a powerful circular saw to someone who has never been trained to use it, they are going to cause horrific damage. The same is true for conflict resolution.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you attempt to mediate a deep-seated grievance without understanding the tools of neutrality and, say, trauma-informed communication, you will likely exacerbate the conflict and multiply the harm.
Which is why the commitment specifies sharing the tools. You aren't just hoarding this technology to make your own life more tranquil, you are actively outfitting the people around you.
Right. It's a communal obligation.
You are teaching your children how to articulate complex emotions so they don't have to resort to physical acting out. You are showing your coworkers how to separate their ego from their project proposals so that criticism isn't processed as a personal attack. You are turning the environment around you into a workshop where these tools are distributed and maintained.
But, the dissemination of these tools faces a massive cultural headwind.
Oh, for sure.
It's not enough to simply hand someone a conceptual tool and explain how it works. You are operating in a society that is fundamentally skeptical of the premise itself. The overriding cultural narrative is deeply cynical.
Yeah, the assumption is that human nature is inherently selfish, zero-sum, and prone to violence.
Right, the Hobbesian view, the idea that without the threat of a violent state keeping us in line, life is nasty, brutish, and short.
And if someone operates from that deeply entrenched cynicism, they're going to look at your tools of peace and just laugh. They will see it as naive, utopian nonsense, snake oil for the soul.
Exactly. And the authors of this manifesto clearly understood that dynamic. They knew that intellectual arguments and persuasive essays are entirely ineffective against deep-seated cynicism.
Because you can't logic someone out of a position they didn't logic themselves into.
Right. Cynicism is an emotional defense mechanism. So how do you bypass it? How do you prove that the tools actually work? This brings us to the heaviest, most intimidating clause of the entire commitment.
Yeah, it says the signer commits to, quote, becoming a personal example and living proof that peace is possible, unquote. This is a line that really stopped me in my tracks.
It's a massive demand.
It is. It is one thing to quietly practice emotional regulation. It is entirely different to declare your own existence as the empirical data proving the viability of a worldview. The manifesto isn't asking you to debate the cynics. It is demanding you become the undeniable physical evidence that contradicts their worldview.
Living proof. The semantics there are brutal in their demand. To be living proof means embodying the principles so thoroughly that your very existence refutes the counter-argument.
It relies on the fractal nature of human society, doesn't it?
Yes, the logic suggests that the macrocosm is perfectly reflected in the microcosm. If true, sustained peace is biologically and psychologically possible in you, a flawed, stressed, historically conditioned human being, then the argument that the human species is biologically locked into perpetual violence is empirically shattered.
So if it works in the test tube, the chemical reaction is valid.
Mm-hmm.
But the sheer weight of being that test tube is terrifying.
It really is.
It means my actual daily life, how I handle a flight cancellation, how I react when a politician I hate wins an election, how I navigate a brutal argument with my spouse. It's no longer just personal experience. It becomes the marketing material for the entire philosophy.
Exactly.
If I sign this, I am agreeing to let my life be scrutinized as the proof of concept.
It is an immense burden, but mathematically it is the only viable strategy for a true paradigm shift. Consider the history of human flight, for example.
Oh, okay. Let's go there.
In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, some of the most brilliant minds on the planet, including Lord Kelvin, publicly stated that heavier-than-air flying machines were a physical impossibility. The academic consensus was heavily weighted against the concept.
So how did the Wright brothers dismantle that massive wall of academic consensus? I mean, they didn't write counterpapers. They didn't go on a debate tour across university campuses trying to persuade professors with complex aerodynamic formulas.
No, they didn't. They went to Kitty Hawk, built a machine, and put it in the air.
They bypassed the intellectual debate entirely by providing an undeniable physical reality. Once a heavier-than-air machine is flying in front of your eyes, all the academic papers proving it impossible become instantly obsolete. The debate is over.
Exactly. The commitment here is asking the individual to become the right flyer of human relationships. You are tasked with getting the machine off the ground in your own daily interactions, despite the heavy gravitational pull of anger, historical grievance, and societal conditioning.
And when a deeply cynical person encounters you successfully navigating a high-conflict situation with genuine de-escalation and compassion, they experience cognitive dissonance.
They're watching heavier-than-air flight.
Right. They can claim all day that humans are inherently savage, but they are staring at an undeniable counterexample. The proof isn't in a manifesto anymore. The proof is standing in front of them, breathing.
But becoming that living proof requires a highly specific operational mechanism. It's fine to use the analogy of a flying machine, but we have to understand the literal physics of how a human being actually achieves this lift in daily life.
How do you process the relentless friction of the world without crashing?
Exactly. And the next phrase of the commitment provides the exact formula.
It's phrased in a very deliberate, almost mathematical way. The pledge continues, quote, "not multiply violence and protect life," unquote. I really want to zero in on the specific verb chosen here. Multiply.
It's such a specific choice.
It is. It does not say, do not start violence. It doesn't say, do not initiate conflict. It explicitly targets the multiplication of it.
The choice of that verb reveals a profound, realistic understanding of how conflict actually propagates through human systems. Violence, whether it's physical, verbal, or systemic, is very rarely spontaneously generated in a vacuum. It is almost always inherited. It is handed to us by someone else.
It's a contagion model, a chain reaction. We see this constantly in social dynamics, right?
Oh, all the time.
Like a CEO gets pressured by a board of directors and feels humiliated. He takes that negative energy and screams at a middle manager. The middle manager swallows that humiliation, goes home, and screams at their partner for a minor mistake in the kitchen.
And the chain continues.
Right. The partner storms out and yells at the kid. The kids go to school the next day and bully a classmate. The original violence wasn't created by the middle manager or the partner or the kid. It was multiplied by them.
Let's look at the evolutionary biology beneath that chain reaction. When you are insulted, threatened, or humiliated, your brain undergoes what psychologists call an amygdala hijack.
Amygdala hijack, yeah.
Yeah, the amygdala, which processes fear and threat, bypasses the neocortex.
That's the logical, reasoning part of your brain.
Correct. It bypasses reason and triggers an immediate fight-or-flight response. Evolutionarily, if a rival tribe member hits you, the safest biological response to ensure survival is to hit back harder to establish dominance. We are neurologically wired to mirror and amplify incoming aggression. We are biologically built to multiply violence.
Wow. So when the commitment asks you to not multiply violence, it is essentially asking you to override millions of years of evolutionary hardwiring in real time.
Yes.
That requires an immense cognitive load. To use an architectural analogy, it makes me think of an electrical circuit breaker in a house. The power grid is constantly sending electricity. Sometimes a massive surge of destructive voltage hits the line. If there is no breaker, that surge races through the copper wiring, blows out the appliances, and burns the house down.
Because the surge just travels along the path of least resistance.
Right. But the entire purpose of a circuit breaker is to stand in the path of that surge, absorb the massive hit of voltage, and physically trip the switch. It snaps the circuit. The breaker takes the damage so that the surge cannot pass through to the rest of the house.
That's a perfect analogy.
In this framework, you are the circuit breaker.
That is exactly the mechanism of not multiplying violence. When someone hands you an insult, a systemic injustice, or a burst of irrational anger, your biological instinct is to act as a copper wire, to just conduct that negative energy straight through to the next person you interact with.
Right, yell at the kids.
Yeah, acting as a circuit breaker means you feel the full heat of that insult. You register the injustice, but you make the agonizing conscious decision to ground the energy. You let the chain reaction of aggression die with you.
But wait, let's explore the reality of that, because taking the hit hurts. I mean, if I am constantly acting as the circuit breaker for my aggressive boss, my toxic family members, and the general hostility of the public, I am just absorbing shock after shock.
It takes a toll.
Yeah, that doesn't sound like a sustainable model for peace. That sounds like I'm volunteering to be a psychological punching bag.
Yeah.
If you just absorb violence without reflecting it, doesn't it eventually destroy you from the inside out?
It absolutely will destroy you, which is precisely why the clause does not end there. The authors recognize the fatal flaw of pure passive absorption. The instruction to not multiply violence is immediately paired with an active, mandatory counterbalance.
And protect life.
Exactly. This creates a dual action system.
So it's not just the negative action of stopping the bad, it's the positive action of guarding the good.
Precisely. If you only act as a sponge for other people's toxicity, you are not protecting life specifically. You are failing to protect your own life. Protecting life means you refuse to multiply the violence, but you also refuse to be destroyed by it. It introduces the vital necessity of boundaries.
Let's put that in a practical scenario just so I can visualize it.
Oh.
If someone is screaming at me, my instinct is to scream back. If I follow the first half of the rule, I don't scream back. I break the circuit. But if I follow the second half of the rule, protecting life, I don't just stand there and let them abuse me.
Correct. You establish a firm, nonviolent boundary to guard your psychological integrity. You might say, I can see you are incredibly angry right now. I will not scream back at you, but I also will not remain in this room while you speak to me this way. We can resume this conversation when the volume comes down. And then you walk away.
Oh, wow.
Right. You have successfully refused to multiply violence, and you have successfully protected your own life.
It completely reframes peace from a passive state of submission into a highly active, highly defensive posture. You're actively shielding the vulnerable aspects of humanity, whether that is your own mental health, the physical safety of a marginalized person on the street, or the integrity of a conversation. You are simultaneously diffusing a bomb and building a blast wall.
It is a brilliantly balanced operational directive. However, even with that balance, the sheer volume of conflict in the world presents a fatal threat to this entire system.
What do you mean?
Well, if you adopt the identity of an agent of change, tasked with sharing tools, acting as a circuit breaker, and actively protecting life, the scope of the mission is essentially infinite.
That is the exact wall I hit when reading this. If I take this mandate seriously, I look out at the world and see a billion places where a circuit breaker is desperately needed.
Exactly.
I see proxy wars in foreign nations. I see climate catastrophes displacing millions. I see domestic political machinery designed entirely around multiplying violence to secure votes. If I am an agent, aren't I obligated to fix all of it?
That's the trap.
It feels like one. If I'm not solving global famine or brokering treaties in the Middle East, aren't I failing the commitment? It feels like a recipe for immediate crushing burnout.
And that feeling is known in the psychological literature as compassion fatigue, or more accurately, psychic numbing.
Psychic numb.
Yeah. Dr. Paul Slovitt, a leading researcher in decision research and psychology, he's done extensive work on this. He studies how human beings react to mass tragedies. His research reveals a terrifying flaw in our cognitive architecture.
Which is?
As the number of victims in a tragedy increases, our empathy does not scale up. It actually drops.
Wait, our empathy drops as more people suffer. That sounds backwards.
I know, but it's called the arithmetic of compassion. If we see a single identifiable victim, say, one child who has fallen down a well, we will move mountains and spend millions of dollars to save them. Our empathy is fully engaged.
Right, everyone tunes in, everyone donates.
Exactly. But if we are presented with a statistic that says 10,000 children are starving in a distant region, our brains literally cannot process the scale. The problem feels so massive and unsolvable that our emotional system shuts down to protect itself from the overwhelming pain. We become numb.
Oh, wow.
We decide that since we cannot save all 10,000, our small contribution is meaningless, and therefore we do nothing.
We let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Because we can't solve the macro problem, we abandon the micro solution. It's an all-or-nothing fallacy that paralyzes us completely.
Precisely. And this is where the final anchoring phrase of the manifesto's commitment comes in. It is perhaps the most crucial piece of engineering in the entire text, because it is specifically designed to bypass Paul Slovic's psychic numbing.
How does it do that?
It solves the problem of infinite scope by imposing radical absolute limits.
The final condition of the pledge reads, quote, "and building peace in the circle that I can reach right now," unquote. That is the end of the sentence, the circle that I can reach right now. It almost feels like a letdown after all the grand talk of being an agent of change. It sounds so incredibly small.
It is small, and its smallness is its absolute genius. The text fundamentally and deliberately restricts the scope of your responsibility. It places two strict, undeniable boundaries on your obligations.
Okay, what are they?
The first is a spatial limitation, the circle I can reach. The second is a temporal limitation right now.
Spatial and temporal limits. Let's break those down. The spatial limit, the circle I can reach. It means I am only responsible for the physical, social, and digital space that my actual voice, my actual arms, and my immediate resources can touch.
Exactly.
I am not responsible for the geopolitical stability of a continent I have never visited. I am not responsible for the inner workings of a massive corporation I don't work for.
Think of a triage medic in the middle of a mass casualty event, like an earthquake in a major city. When the medic arrives on the scene, there is chaos, screaming, and thousands of people who need immediate medical attention.
Pure overwhelm.
If that medic looks at the entirety of the city and tries to calculate how to save everyone, they will freeze. They will experience complete psychic numbing. If they try to run frantically from block to block, tossing bandages everywhere, they will exhaust themselves in 10 minutes and effectively save nowhere.
Right, they spread their resources so thin that the impact drops to zero.
Exactly. So what does a trained triage medic actually do? They draw an invisible circle around themselves with a radius of about 10 feet. They ignore the city, they ignore the next block over, they look exclusively at the person bleeding out right at their feet inside that circle.
They focus strictly on what's in reach.
Yes. They apply the tourniquet, they stabilize the airway, they do the work they can reach. Once that person is stabilized, the medic takes a step forward, the circle moves with them, and they treat the next person who falls within the radius.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The spatial limitation isn't an excuse to do less. It is a tactical requirement to ensure you actually accomplish something. By restricting the battlefield to your immediate vicinity, it strips away the excuse of powerlessness.
Exactly.
I mean, I could always tell myself I am powerless to stop a war. That is a convenient truth that lets me off the hook. But I cannot tell myself I am powerless to stop screaming at my kids. I have 100% agency over my immediate radius.
It forces accountability by removing the scale that creates apathy. And then you add the temporal limitation, right now. You are not asked to guarantee that you will be a perfect agent of peace a decade from now. You are not asked to solve conflicts that might arise next year. You are only responsible for the exact present moment.
So when you combine those two limitations, your immediate space and your immediate present, you create an environment where action is always possible and always required.
It is radical localization. We started this whole deep dive by looking at the overwhelm of the 24-hour news cycle. We look at the screens and feel like we are failing the world. But this commitment looks at you and says, you aren't responsible for the screen. You are responsible for the room you are sitting in.
When you put all of these pieces together, you realize that these two sentences aren't just a flowery sign-off to a document. They are a complete, self-sustaining behavioral loop.
It really is a complete architecture.
Let's trace the entire path of what we just uncovered in this text, because it's a lot. We start by dropping the paralyzing need to be perfect. We publicly acknowledge that we are not saints. We are flawed. We make mistakes. But we abandon the fragility of purity for the resilience of active accountability. We realize our responsibility.
We step out of the illusion and into reality.
Right. Then we adopt the identity of an active agent. We stop treating peace like a magical, passive feeling we just hope washes over the world, and we start treating it like a specialized technology.
We pick up the tools.
Exactly. We pick up the literal tools of emotional regulation, boundary setting, and de-escalation, and we commit to sharing those tools with everyone around us.
We view ourselves as catalysts rather than victims.
And we bear the incredibly heavy burden of being living proof. We don't waste our time writing angry essays on the internet trying to prove that a better world is possible. We just build the right flyer in our own lives. We let our actual messy daily behavior become the undeniable physical evidence that humans can transcend their violent nature.
We bypass cynicism with undeniable data.
We execute this by acting as human circuit breakers. When the chain reaction of violence and cruelty hits us, we absorb the shock, refuse to multiply it, and actively protect the life and dignity of ourselves and those around us.
Stopping the surge.
And crucially, we avoid the trap of psychic numbing. We don't try to take the weight of the entire globe on our shoulders. We aggressively shrink our focus to the triage zone, building peace exclusively in the circle we can reach right here, right now.
It is a masterclass in making the impossible achievable. It takes a concept as massive and abstract as world peace and distills it into a hyper-local, immediate personal obligation. It cures the paralysis of the modern age by giving you exactly one manageable job, which is to look at what is directly in front of you.
And that leads us to the final thought we want to leave you, the listener, with today. We've spent this entire deep dive unpacking the sociology, the neuroscience, and the profound semantics of this single commitment. But if we leave it as just an interesting intellectual discussion, we are violating the very premise of the text.
We have to bring it out of the abstract and into your physical reality.
Exactly. So think about the physical space you are occupying at this exact moment. Are you driving in your car? Are you walking the dog in your neighborhood? Are you sitting at a desk in an office or at the kitchen table in your home?
Based on the commitment we just analyzed, peace isn't some distant geopolitical goal waiting for humanity to magically evolve. It is a highly specific tool sitting right in front of you.
It is the ability to break a circuit. It is the ability to protect a boundary. It is the decision to not multiply the stress of the day.
So I want you to ask yourself, look around the environment you are in right now. Who or what is currently standing at the exact edge of your reachable circle, just waiting for you to extend that tool to them today?